Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Monday, October the 20th. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News here in London.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico in Washington. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the show that gives you everything you need to know in 20 minutes about the day ahead in British politics.
Now, we did tell you that we would be off this morning, but there's so much going on and we've both gathered so much intel, particularly Anne, I have to say, since Thursday's pod, that we have done a recording a little bit early in order to make sure we are still there in your Monday morning feed.
No pressure on me there, Sam. Now, number 10, we'll be hoping a new week means it can break out of this relentless tide of adverse stories about dealings with China that continued over the weekend. But is it anywhere near to really over? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. We've got a rare Monday cabinet meeting later this morning because there's a regional investment conference tomorrow in Birmingham. Several ministers need to head to that.
Defence Secretary John Healey is giving the annual Lord Mayor's Defence and Security Lecture early evenings at, I think, 6:30. Now, this is a moment where city figures can hear from the Defence Secretary about what defence and security policy looks like, which is quite important because, of course, the defence industry is very big in this country. So a moment where those two crowds can meet. I think it's also here that we'll hear a bit more on the record from a cabinet minister about China and potentially Russia, because, of course, we've got those attempts by President Trump to score yet another peace deal with more talks potentially with President Putin.
The government's also got an announcement, the white paper today on technical colleges, building on Keir Starmer's conference pledge that 2/3 of young people would go either to university or technical college, changing that Blair era target there of the 50% to higher education. I think there will be questions about the so-called gold-plated part of that, Sam, that alternatives to higher education would be high quality. Let's see if we get an answer to what that means on small budgets.
Number 10, I think, thinks that this is the big thing going into the week, that white paper, because it's the big thing that cut through from Keir Starmer's speech, the moment of authenticity, where the Prime Minister criticised the snobbery of people not going to university. In that light, Anne, I do think it's a bit weird that we're going to hear only from Bridget Phillipson about this. And actually, you're not going to get the stamp of the Prime Minister again on this policy today. So that just a bit of dissonance. If it's really his big thing, why not see him own it? The other thing to watch today, and actually think this is the biggest thing of the week in Parliament, it's actually in the Lords. It's the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that's back. It's got all of these new pro-growth amendments from Rachel Reeves and Steve Reid, powers for ministers to stop councils refusing planning permission and the like. Now, as we said last week, Rachel Reeves really, really wants this jumbo bill to get royal assent so she can get the Office of Budget Responsibility to score them as pro-growth and shrink the back hole and make tax rises she needs to find the amount of those tax rises smaller. But I've discovered there's a big, big coalition of opposition building in the Lords, including Labour peers who think they can at least delay the bill some months, which would be a massive headache for Rachel Reeves, and in turn, she will make that a big headache for Steve Reid.
Rachel Reeves is back from Washington. She's announcing something called Sterling 20. That's a new investor-led partnership between 20 of the UK's largest pension funds and insurers, intended really to encourage them to place more investment inside the UK and in long-term infrastructure projects in particular. I thought she was pretty chirpy when I saw her at an event the British Embassy hosted for her late last week. She is, I think, keen to make a mark with things like this pension fund plan. Now, it's modelled quite closely on something called the Maple 8 pension investment model in Canada. And that brings our old friend on this podcast, Mark Carney, now Prime Minister, back to the fore. He's very much in the background of this. He's been talking to Rachel Reeves about the scheme. He's also, as it happens, something of an investment expert in this area himself. And Reeves will say that she wants to unlock billions of pounds of investment with these arm's length arrangements of investors, independent from government, we should say, but incentivized towards national tasks, national rebuilding, etc. That, if it works out well, could obviously be very good. You get what you need. You need some more capital in the UK, and not always just going outside looking for the quickest buck that it can make. But there are criticisms of these kinds of schemes, and I think we will hear more of them because a lot of centre-left leaders like them. They're very long-term. They tie capital closer to home. But if the funds don't do so well, then a lot of their members will be saying, was this such a brilliant idea? And it does, one way or the other, bring investment closer to government. I'm never quite sure how that firewall works in practice. I think there'll be quite a lot of questions about it. But, kudos to Reeves. She has got 20 really big funds to sign up to it. So, she's got momentum on her side.
I think messing with pension funds is one of the most dangerous things that chancellors can do. So I couldn't agree with you more, Anne. Watch this like a hawk, but I think in the first instance, the government will be pretty pleased how far they've got. This is a more collaborative approach. There was some suggestion of a bit more carrot and stick earlier in the year. I think they've had to drop that because you don't force pension funds to do anything for fear of actually undermining the savings that they will deliver to pensioners one day. Right. And lovely to hear your first reference to you being in Washington. Frankly, I want to rinse you for all of the intel that you can possibly give me, because I'm jealous that you're out there and I'm not. So let's start with the big vacancy, the UK ambassador to Washington. Tell me, what are you hearing?
Right. Well, this is what everybody is gossiping about 24/7 on the diplomatic circuit and the penumbra around the embassy. So we have James Roscoe, who is acting head of the mission after the withdrawal of Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, over his association with Jeffrey Epstein. It was James who was hosting that reception for Rachel Reeves very ably. Nobody doubts he can handle that kind of big event. He's quietly very well connected here, but he does seem to accept that he will remain operationally senior but not be the figurehead. So that brings us, Sam, to the runners and riders. We've seen Mark Sedwill emerge there towards the front of the pack, probably the preferred Whitehall candidate. He's a former cabinet secretary, still very active. He sort of pitches into quite a lot of national debates, including the China one, actually. So he doesn't mind his name being in the news. He's also been in Afghanistan and Pakistan, so he has the security chops to deal with that side of the job. I would say he's, if you like, the safety first candidate, if there is such a thing these days in Washington ambassadorships. But one name who people have been talking about here a lot to me is Varun Chandra. He's special advisor to Keir Starmer on business and investment, a former banker and very successful consultant. Now, he has had a bit of a tense relationship, by all accounts, with Peter Mandelson when Mandelson was in post here. And there was that story, do you remember, about Peter Mandelson talking about himself in the third person along the lines of, if you want to talk to the administration, you go through Peter Mandelson. And I think that sort of got out there. I think, in fairness, he was trying to say, we've got to be clear who talks to whom and not get into too much of a muddle. But Chandra definitely wanted to have his own channels and do his own thing. And I don't think he saw himself as in any way reporting to Peter Mandelson. So I think he could be one to watch, certainly through those trade negotiations, met a lot of all the big players, the Rubios, the Scott Bessents, etc., on the Trump team. A lot of people who keep being on the list seem to me really either don't want the job or aren't going to get it. Richard Moore, the outgoing head of MI6, has made pretty clear he doesn't want it and felt that he ended up on the list by accident. I think the great magnification of DC politics in the big picture means it's impossible to have someone so associated with the Democrats or with a left of centre worldview like David Miliband, who's over here heading a big refugee charity, but that doesn't seem to quite chime with where Trump is. And finally, Dame Karen Pierce. A lot of people would like to see her back here. She was the ambassador before Peter Mandelson, who built that close relationship with the Trump team. But I'm told that her relations with number 10, and Starmer in particular, could be a bit frosty, and that the Prime Minister doesn't speak to this person in a lot of days in the week, wants someone that he's more at ease with. So that seems a less likely return story unless something changes in that relationship. She's now heading up Western Balkans, so she's got a diplomatically quite senior role vis-a-vis Russia and Eastern Europe. looks less likely she'll return than perhaps we thought.
What a great list to hear. Roscoe, Sedwell, Chandra, probably not Moore, probably not Pierce, but we'll keep our eyes on all of those names. Thank you. I suppose the question that flows from that for me, Anne, is what do we think the job description is? What do we think the vibe is?
Yeah, I've been working on this project, and maybe we'll talk about it a bit later in the week in more detail on what I'm just calling the great magnification of the dealings, really through the prism of the UK in our case. And I think it's a recognition that, in all probability, lots of things could change around US politics as they can anywhere else. But that if you're going to bank on something, you bank on the fact that Trump is more of a continuity project, and his worldview and his way of doing politics and make America great again is more likely to persist even beyond the end of the Trump second term, Sam, than that there'll be some swing back in the other direction. We saw at the weekend these No Kings marches across the country, here in DC as well, on the threat to democracy. Many Trump critics feel is being ignored or downplayed, or that people got their fingers in their ears. We can see that march of Mamdani, a left-wing candidate, towards the mayoralty in New York. But if you're really looking at the power play between the world capitals, between Washington and London in our case, it's about really being sure that you're not ending up in a position where you're not well seen or not well connected to the MAGA network. People are really sort of effectively being asked to pick a side in terms of whether it's media companies, whether it's big businesses. What is their relationship to Donald Trump, to the people around him? Within that, well, there are schisms, there's competition, particularly between Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, and J.D. Vance. There's also the sense that you can't really get away from that competition. But if you don't understand it and you don't keep committing to the relationship with Trump, whatever you really think about him or his project, you'll be out of the power game. That is a prism I think would have come home to number 10 as it looks to appoint the next ambassador.
MAGA forever. That's fascinating.
Well, for a while at least.
There's one more element of this I want to just dig into. And I want to understand, Anne, a little bit about China through the eyes of Washington. There's one really good detail in the Sunday papers about this ongoing row between the UK and China and the collapse of that case, the prosecution into two alleged spies who were feeding material back to the Politburo, allegedly. And that is that on September the 1st, there was a big Whitehall meeting. They say that their deputy national security advisor at the heart of this, Matthew Collins, along with Jonathan Powell, along with Ollie Robbins, and a series of other big mandarins met to discuss the handling of the China spy case, which at that point was going ahead. Now, this puts everybody's fingerprints on what was going on, which is interesting. And there is no denial, I've had no denial that this meeting went ahead. So the fact of the meeting is true. What they do deny is that they did anything after that to pressure the prosecutors to drop the meeting or in any way suggested that. But they do say, look, we did talk about the consequences if this trial goes ahead and is successful and the prosecution is successful for bilateral relations. We don't deny that was an issue on the agenda. So quite a lot of engagement from senior mandarins on all of this. Which just puts, I feel, puts things in a slightly new and fresher light about how urgent some of the themes around this trial were for people at the top of Whitehall, which was not something I feel that politicians were saying openly in like a week or two ago. But just tell us about where MAGA is with China at the moment and Trump is with China at the moment. Is over close relations between the UK and Beijing a problem from your side of the Atlantic?
Actually not, because you know who else is pursuing a closer relationship with Beijing? Donald Trump. And there was just a moment last week, so much was happening around politics, both sides of the Atlantic last week, that this, I don't think, got quite as much attention as it should have done, is that China and the US are about to start trade talks again next week. And Donald Trump said the 100% tariff, if you remember how he came in tub thumping about that big tariffs on China because of the unfairness, as he saw it, that China had visited on the global trading system for decades. He has now used the word unsustainable about his own tariffs. Only Donald Trump, you feel, could get away with doing a massive tariff onslaught and then deciding to use the word unsustainable about it. And that's clearly a sign that as he's going to sit down with President Xi in a couple of weeks, the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, massive figure in all of this, I just mentioned, in terms of someone you need to get on with if you want to be a UK ambassador to DC, he is doing pre-meetings as early, I think it's Friday this week, in Malaysia. So this is like quite a serious attempt, I think, to soften that tariff war with China. Unusually, perhaps we seem to be more in the kind of, we were in the right place as far as the administration saw it, that we were being tough on China. The administration, I think, has moved to wanting to warm up its relationships to an extent. They'll still be competitive, but they won't be so hostile. Just as the Prime Minister in the UK comes under pressure to toughen up his position. It's very difficult, I think, to guess how the US is going to handle China. So I think you just try not to be too hostage for fortune. In the end, I think Donald Trump understands trade is trade. And I think on that, I think he probably thinks the UK is more or less in the right position. Spies, schmies, whatever.
Excellent. That's absolutely fascinating. Right, I'm going to do a quick handbrake turn just to finish off because there's so much going on the Home Affairs front. Shabana Mahmood's in trade is incredibly complex. I think quite soon we are going to get the chair of the new grooming gangs inquiry. Jason Farrell, my colleague, had narrowed that down to two names: Annie Hudson, who chaired the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, and ex-cop Jim Gamble, who was head of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre. So one of those two. Second big thing she's got in her in tray is that November 6th football match about the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans who at the current time of speaking we have are not able to attend that match. But the thing I think is going to drag on into this week is that we are just a whisker away in 2025 of exceeding the number of people who came over the channel in small boats. So according to Home Office data and our data team, if just 83 more people cross the channel, that will, this year to date, will have surpassed the entirety of 2024. So I think the Home Office is going to feel under pressure to try and step up the amount of stuff it's doing to show it is taking illegal migration seriously, because all of those things are a little bit are quite problematic. A record number of 16 illegal migrants have been returned to France this week, they're saying, bringing the total number of returns to 42. All I'll say, Anne, is that those are quite small numbers. So I wouldn't use the word record near the word 16 when we're dealing with illegal migration.
Yeah, I mean, double figures under 50. Yeah, you have to prove out the concept, don't you? You've got to do it in practice, and it's got to be seen to work. So maybe the numbers will go up from that. But I think, as you suggest, that figure is probably not a satisfactory one for the Home Secretary, as she really looks to show that she is exerting her muscle on this perceived problem and to make that cut through the electorate. I see you've acquired a large, fluffy cat on your lap. Are you now using the cat as your alarm signal that it's time for me to wind up?
It's my therapy cat that gets me through everything. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington. An absolutely fascinating download of everything that you've heard over the last 3 days. And we will be back tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, for Politics of Sam and Anne. So we will see you then.
Are you back UK side then?